What? What? Do you want to speak? You like it? Who's your favourite character? Right. Anyway.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another book review by your favourite book reviewer, and I'm here to join her today to help her with a review. But anyway, today I'm reviewing Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. So Elantris is actually Brandon Sanderson's first ever published novel. I think he wrote 12 novels before he got published, and this was actually the 9th one he wrote. So he wrote 3 in between this book finally getting picked up. That just shows how much work it can really take to become an author, and sometimes you will need to write lots and lots of books before you actually get published, and it really just shows how much work you have to put in, and it gives you a lot more respect for writers. I am a writer myself, and I know that if it would take that much for me to get published, I will do it, because writing is all I ever have wanted to do. So I've actually been getting quite a lot into Brandon Sanderson lately, and for those of you who don't know, most of his fantasy novels are actually connected in this wider universe called the Cosmere, which is basically, from what I read, I'm not fully up to date with it. It's like a solar system full of planets, and each planet has their own different magic systems, so they're all actually connected in space. And from what I've read from his plans for the future, Brandon Sanderson, he plans ahead, and oh my god, what he's planning is crazy. If you haven't read Mistborn, I'll definitely be reviewing them soon, but he's planned out Mistborn all the way up until like the future of that world, and he's planning like a sci-fi series based on that planet. So from what I gather, he's going to turn this universe of fantasy stories into a universe of sci-fi stories, basically evolved from these magical worlds. That's far in the future, but that just sounds awesome, so I'm excited for that. But at the moment, he's primarily writing fantasy. Even though this is his first book in the Cosmere, it's not the first book of his I read even. I did not write Sanderson's books. I wish I did, but no, I didn't. That was actually Mistborn, but I'll talk about that a bit more later. Some people recommend starting with Elantris because it's the first book chronologically in the Cosmere, and also chronologically that he published. But I don't recommend reading this for a few reasons. I recommend actually starting with Mistborn. That's because one of the things that Brandon, sometimes I accidentally call him Branderson. I accidentally mix his first name and his second name, and it just comes out as Branderson. Happens a lot. So what he's basically really well known for are these like really intricate magic systems, as well as these epic sort of fight scenes. He's really well known for his action and just action-packed stories. Like, his action's really, really cool. And the way he uses his magic systems within the fight and all the rules behind it, there's some badass scenes in his book, so that's all I'm going to say. The thing about Elantris is that it isn't heavily action-based, and I don't think that's a negative at all in the slightest, but it can kind of give a false view of what Brandon Sanderson's books are really like, because this is more, I guess, a political sort of character-based novel. I mean, a lot of his books are more character-based than plot-based, I'd say, because he really likes to delve into the characters, which is what I love, because the way I see it, characters are the most important part of a story. Like, what's the point of having the story if there's not characters to drive it and to get invested in? But this book's definitely more character-based and sort of political-themed rather than action-themed. I actually really enjoyed that about this book, because it gave me even more respect for Brandon Sanderson, because it showed me that not only is he good at these epic, action-packed stories, but he's really good at telling these human stories as well, even though, don't get me wrong, it does have action at times. I think, in a way, because of the lack of action leading up to them, and the build-up to these scenes, in some ways it's almost more satisfying, because rather than getting lots of scattered fight scenes, you get these built-up cool scenes that you kind of look forward to. But this book just really showed the span of Brandon Sanderson's skills and how good of a writer he is. A lot of people don't like this as much as his other books, but in some ways I might even go as far to say that I enjoyed it more than some of the Mistborn books. I just think it's so unique, because the thing he's most well known for is creating these massive, vivid magic systems with all these rules and limitations, and he's an expert at that. At the moment, Brandon Sanderson's, he's like the top dog in fantasy, and he's kind of set this theme where now, as before, like in Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and stuff, soft magic systems were the thing, where like you don't really understand the magic system. Now it's like all about hard magic systems, where you have these rules, if you use this type of magic, you have to sacrifice this, or, there's rules behind the magic, and you know exactly how it works. Like Mistborn is a great example of that. And it was the first proper, like, hard magic system I got into. And I remember reading Mistborn, not knowing anything about Brandon Sanderson before. I was like, wow, this magic system is crazy. Like, this is so good. I just found it so unique, and it just sucked me in. Like, it's honestly, this man is is a genius. Like, speaking about that, in general, he just seems like such an intelligent person. He just seems to write like a smart person. I enjoy watching videos of his. He actually does a live stream every couple weeks where he does live signings and he just answers questions like a Q&A. I enjoy tuning into them because he's just a really interesting person to listen to, especially if you're like an aspiring writer, because he does give a lot of advice about writing and things like that in those videos as well. So I definitely recommend checking that out. But yeah, he's known for these intricate magic systems. But in Elantris, even though the magic system in this is also really uniquely built, but the story is set at a time where this magic system has actually almost like died out, which is really interesting. I'll give a bit of background behind the story. There's this city called Elantris which borders this kingdom called Teod, and in this city people used to live like gods. They used to have golden skin. They could use these things called eons, which are like magical runes, kind of symbol things that let them do different things. They could heal people, they could live forever. So they were like almost worshipped by the people in Teod and like the kingdom around it. One day this thing happened, I think it was called like the Sundering, this like terrible event. Now everyone who becomes an Elantrian turns into this like horrible kind of creature, not creature, but like they have like black skin and black sort of smudges around their skin. They just look horrible. They're also basically cursed to feel every wound they ever have forever. So if someone stubs their toe, they'll feel that pain forever. And I thought this was really interesting, and it really kind of increased the stakes of the story, because if the characters ever got damaged like at all, you know that that'll stick with them forever. And if they do get injured to the point where it's like so excruciating that they can't deal with it, they'll basically just like lie down and just sink away into like a permanent sleep. So they're basically dead, but not. Usually when they're in this state, they'll just mutter like one phrase like forever and ever. So the stakes are high. And I really like the world building of Elantris. I really like the concept of people who are once seen as gods now turning into like horrible deformed monsters. I loved this, and like the concept hooked me in. The first couple sentences really hooked me in. And one of the main characters, who's Raoden? Raoden. It's a fantasy name. I'm terrible at pronunciation. Raoden. That's how I kind of read it. Raoden? Raoden. I don't know how to say his name, sorry. He's the Prince of Teod, and he's like the heir to the throne. One day he wakes up, and this isn't a spoiler because it happens at the beginning, and then he realizes that he's got these black smudges all over him and everything, and he realizes that he's been chosen as an Elantrian. But basically what they do with the Elantrians these days is they toss them into Elantris, and they don't let them out, and they lock them in. And every time they throw a person into Elantris, they have a bag of food with them, and this kind of causes the gangs within Elantris to fight over this food, and there's just a lot of violence and gang war going on. And this, like I said, the stakes are very high, because if you're injured, you're injured forever. So on the other side of the story, you follow Serene, who's the princess of Arlen, and she's in a marriage pact with Raoden, and they're trying to basically form an alliance between the two kingdoms, because in the other side of the world there's this feudal empire where they follow this religion called Shu-Dereth, and they worship this god called Jadith. At this point they control almost every place in the entire world, but Arlen and Teod are like the two remaining kingdoms that they haven't converted to their religion. So they feel like the only way to protect themselves from them is by forming this alliance before, you know, the inevitable happens and they come down and invade their kingdoms. And Serene's storyline shows the more kind of political part as she works her way into the courts of Teod and becomes friends with some of the people there. I really liked the sort of cast in Teod. At first I found like there were a lot of characters introduced at once, but then you really quickly get to know them all and you really get attached to the characters. They're all well built. Some of the relationships between some of the characters I really enjoyed. And then the third POV character is Raoden, who's basically a high up member of the Shu-Dereth religion, and his goal is to convert the city into that religion. But in a way he sees himself as the hero, because if he doesn't convert them within a certain amount of time, the feudal empire will just invade and kill everyone, slaughter everyone. I really enjoyed Raoden's character. He's one of my favorite villains I think I've ever read. His arc was just so good. I just love characters where they think they're the good guy and when they're redeemable, because Raoden actually cares about people. Like, I just love that about him, and there's definitely more evil people than him in this story. If you like redeemable villains, then you'll like Raoden. And I really enjoyed the fact that you actually get to follow him throughout the book, because I really enjoy stories where you see the POV of the villain and you just get more into their shoes and understand them more, and it just kind of builds them up a lot more as a character. But back to what I was saying about the magic system. So it's basically set in a time where the magic system's broken down, so you don't actually see a lot of the magic at the beginning of the story, but as the story goes on you see these sort of hints of the magic and the mysteries kind of unveiled over time by Raoden, because Raoden's basically trying to figure out the magic and like why it died and how it works, because he wants to band together all the people in Elantris, fix Elantris and make it livable and bring back all the good things about Elantris and the magic and all that. Because whilst everyone else is fighting, he's trying to band everyone together and create a new life. One of my favorite types of storylines is seeing people kind of grow to power and just kind of progress. Like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like progression, almost like in a game. I loved seeing how he like gained more followers as the story went on. He almost like makes his own gang, but it's not a gang. He wants to make Elantris livable again, and he wants to make it like a community where everyone works together. and I just really enjoyed following his progress throughout the book. That was one of my favourite storylines. Although Raoden isn't the best character ever, the only issue I have with Raoden is that he doesn't have a lot of flaws. He's kind of like a perfect character. Even Sanderson said this himself. I definitely preferred Serene and the other characters, because although Raoden's likeable, he's a nice guy, he just doesn't have many flaws, and a lot of his issues are kind of fixed very, very easily. So even though the magic isn't seen until later on in the book, I loved the mystery behind it. It was probably one of my favourite ways that magic has ever been used in a book, because I just loved discovering what this magic is and why it disappeared, and I just really liked the mystery. And when you finally see the part where the magic is like properly used, I just smiled, and I actually just felt like, it's like in Avengers when the Avengers assemble, you know, it's like, you know stuff's about to go down when this magic is finally harnessed like properly to its full power. I just loved that about this book. The build up was just so good. That was just definitely my favourite thing about this book. I loved the climax. I was just burning through it. I was hooked. I couldn't put the book down. I quite liked how it ended, and also I think there are a few novellas to this book, and there are also planned future novels. I really loved the world. The world was great. Magic system was amazing, as always with Brandon Sanderson. Characters were great. The relationships were great. Obviously Raoden, I did a bit of an issue with him. The story, just everything about this book, I just loved it. Oh yeah, one character I missed out, who was also one of my favourites, was Galadon. That's another thing. The dialogue in this book was just so good. The friendships between characters. Like, Galadon was one of my favourite characters. He was basically from this other kingdom, so he used terms from this kingdom, like, every time he spoke. Like, he referred to Raoden as Sul, which I think basically means, like, friend in his language. But just the way that, like, you can understand who's talking just by certain terms that he uses. Sanderson just has a way of blending these words into the story so they just become so natural. And I can't really fully explain it, but I just loved it so much. The dialogue for me was just, like, so good, and I loved Galadon as a character. He was one of my favourite kind of sidekick friend characters. So despite the fact that this book is quite dark, and there's a lot of death, and it's grimy, even Elantris itself is like a dark, horrible place, I still felt like really happy at a lot of parts when I was reading this book. Like, I actually smiled a lot when I read it. Like, I loved, like I said about the friendships, and like the ending just made me feel so satisfied. A book that can take you from one extreme to the other is a good book. So aside from the issues with Raoden, there weren't really that many issues in the book. Although one other thing I would say is just how at times there were a few moments where there were just convenient rescues that happened, where like the character was in trouble and then out of nowhere they got saved, and that just happened a few times, which was a bit annoying. But there were also moments where this was built up and it was more satisfying, which was not the best, but it's redeemable by all the other aspects of the story, so I didn't have too much of an issue with that. Overall, Elantris is a really good book. Like I said, I recommend reading Mistborn first, because it won't be for everyone, and it might put people off of the Cosmere if they don't read that first. You don't have to read all of the books to understand them as individuals, but if you want to get into the wider Cosmere, then I recommend reading this after Mistborn, and I think you'll enjoy it. I'd probably give it a 4.5 out of 5, which is really high ranking for me, because I usually only go like 4. I very rarely go above 4. I'm quite strict with my rankings, and it really shows Sanderson's strength as an author and the different aspects of story that he can pull off really well that he doesn't always show as much in his other. And after all the books I've read by him, I know now that I will be reading pretty much everything he pumps out. He's earned his place at the top of the fantasy writers right now. You can see why he's up there. Anyway, thank you for watching. Leave a link up there if you want to have a look at my review of Stormfront, the first Dresden Files book. If you want to keep up to date with anything that I am planning on posting in the future, or with my writing, because I am an aspiring author, so I focus a lot on my writing, and there will be a lot of writing videos coming soon. If you want to keep up with that, then my Twitter is in the description below. Feel free to follow that. So feel free to chat with me at any time. I respond to all my DMs and comments, so feel free to talk about anything, about any books, and I'll be happy to talk. But anyway, yeah, so I'll see you in the next video, and thank you for watching my review of Elantris.